Will the United States remain a superpower in 2040? What are some of the most significant challenges putting this country's future at risk? How can history help us reset our path forward? And what are some key reforms necessary to secure a better future for this country? I'll explore these very important questions and more with Dave Walker, former U.S. Comptroller General and author of America in 2040, Still a Superpower? A Pathway to Success. So, Dave, what prompted you to write this book, and who is your intended audience for the work?
Well, I wrote the book because I was a professor at the Naval Academy and I was teaching the economics of national security. And the good news was I could teach whatever I wanted as long as it related to the topic. The bad news was there was no textbook. So I basically had to pull together the syllabus and all the material to teach the course. And after I taught it for a semester, and I taught it for several semesters, I said, well, I might as well write a book about this. But I didn't want to write an academic treatise. I wanted to write something that would be of interest to a broad cross-section of Americans. And, as you know, Michael, I have a very unusual background. I've run 3 federal agencies, trustee, Social Security, Medicare, chairman of the Audit Committee of the United Nations. I'm on the Defense Business Board, run a couple of not-for-profits. And so, my background is very unusual, and I've had the opportunity to be able to gain some insights that very, very few people have. And so that's why I wrote the book.
Dave, what are the critical issues facing America that you lay out in your book, America in 2040, Still a Superpower? A Pathway to Success? Why is America at such a critical crossroads?
Well, first, the book is really about economic security, national security, and domestic tranquility. What are the different challenges that we face in all 3 of those dimensions? And from a big picture, the international scene has changed dramatically. We now face an alliance against U.S. interests led by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. There are others that are involved as well. We also have a situation where our position in the world has declined from over 50% of GDP after World War II to about 24% of GDP. We've lost control of our finances. We have demographic challenges and challenges in a number of areas, such as education, such as immigration and things of that nature. And so basically, the bottom line is that we've got a lot of flashing yellow and in some cases red lights that we need to wake up and make some tough choices. So if we want our future to be better than our past. And the number one thing, if you can't put your finances in order, things aren't going to work out over time. And right now, we don't have our finances in order. Economic security is driven by, can you put your finances in order? And that's the leading indicator on the way up and on the way down as a superpower.
I think that's one thing you underscore in the whole book, and I think it's the most important insight of the book. You tee up the book, Dave, with a very compelling sort of a potential scenario for 2040. And you presented in the book, this is what potentially could happen if the U.S. doesn't change course, in particular, get that economic security right and fix our spending habits, if you will. Could you tell us more about this? Maybe paint that scenario for our listeners. And why is it purposefully illustrative rather than predictive? I like that distinction.
Well, first, it's intended to be a wake-up call that we must, and hopefully we will end up making the tough choices necessary to make sure that our future is better than our past. But based upon where we're at, and based on the course that we're on, things could not be very positive in 2040 if we don't end up making some tough choices. I came up with something that's illustrative because the truth is only God knows what happened between now and 2040. But what I did is not just base it on my experience. I also have a number of very good high-level friends from the military, including former Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Bill Owens, who wrote the foreword for the book. And so I reached out to him and many other people, some of whom did an endorsement for the book, like Mike Mullen, who's former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, just to make sure that they felt that it was credible, and they did.
What are the greatest economic and national security threats facing the U.S. today?
If I had to say one, it's our fiscal irresponsibility, because if you don't put your finances in order, you're going to suffer from the standpoint of the economy, opportunity for individuals, international standing, national security, and ultimately domestic tranquility. And you don't just have to rely upon me. I've been saying this for many, many years. But back in 2010, then Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, said the greatest threat to our national security is our own fiscal irresponsibility. Here's the challenging thing. Young people are are very concerned about environmental sustainability. And it's climate change is real, and mankind does, have some responsibility for that. At the same point in time, the United States can try to lead by example with regard to climate change initiatives. But if China and India and other parts of the world don't do their part, we're never going to solve the problem. And the truth is, right now, they're not doing their part. And our approaches are too aggressive, too fast, to be able to adjust from an economic standpoint, especially with regard to, alternative vehicles and things of that nature and alternative forms of energy. At the same point in time, if you look at the fiscal issue, if we don't put our finances in order, we're not just going to suffer, the world is going to suffer. And so therefore, there's a fiscal sustainability issue that young people ought to be concerned about, because that's something we can, must, and hopefully will do something about. We don't need anybody else to do anything. We can do it ourselves. And the fact is, if we don't do it, young people are going to bear a disproportionate share of the adverse consequences of failing to act.
I want to turn to some of the recommendations or reforms that are outlined in the book around the government organization, if you will. And you point out that the federal government has grown dramatically. It's become more siloed and hierarchical. Can you highlight for us some of the key reforms that are outlined in the book that will improve attractiveness of government, the efficiency, effectiveness, credibility, but mainly and also the fiscal sustainability? What are some of those reforms?
Well, let me give you a stat. In 1912, which is a year before the 1913 year we talked about before, total federal spending was 2% of the economy. That was the size of the federal government, 2% of the economy. Now it's 24% of the economy and growing. So it's 12 times bigger. And yet we're spending about $2 trillion a year more than we're taking in. And we've got a huge hole that's getting deeper with the passage of time. Government has grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget. It's become a bloated bureaucracy that does not do adequate planning for the future and does not end up focusing its activities on the items that are necessary to achieve positive outcomes for the American people. A number of things that I talk about is the need for a strategic plan, a framework, if you will, for the federal government. Every individual agency has to have one, but the federal government doesn't have one. We need to revise, the budgeting process. We've talked a little bit about that. We need to adopt key national indicators, outcome-based indicators based upon what are the kinds of things that we're trying to accomplish. How do we measure success? Are we doing better or worse? And how do we compare to others? If you don't know how you're doing, if you don't know if you're getting better or worse, and if you don't know how you compare to others, you don't know how you're doing. And we don't have that. The best example is what we did at GAO. When I came to GAO, we had never done a strategic plan, and yet, we were the ones that were supposed to be leading by example. So we did one. We dramatically transformed the agency. We eliminated a third of our offices. We eliminated a layer of management. We consolidated 35 units to 13. We changed our performance measurement and reward systems. We leveraged technology. We changed our recruiting approaches and a variety of other things. We became much more transparent about what we were doing and how we were trying to measure success and how we were doing it. And the bottom line is, those are just a few examples. When I left, we were 13% smaller, 50 to 100% more productive, depending upon what measure, 3 times the outcome-based results, second best place to work in the federal government, and we were generating over $100 return for every dollar invested in the agency. What we did is transferable and scalable, but it takes time, and it takes committed leadership from the top.
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Dave Walker, former U.S. Comptroller General and author of America in 2040, Still a Superpower? A Pathway to Success. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.